Hello, salam, shalom, namaste, sat sri akal, aloha, hola, ciao, bonjour, buna, and privyet. You know, I'm very happy today, and I know you'll be very happy today. In fact, we'll all be extra, extra happy today. You know why? Because we have a wonderful, wonderful returning guest. And I was just telling our returning guest, which is Alex Colkitt, that she's the first guest I've had that is coming back for the fourth time. That's amazing. I just love you so much, Alex. So welcome back again and again and again and again.
Yes, thank you for having me again and again and again. I love our conversations. It's amazing to talk to somebody who's also a happiness expert because we have so much to talk about. And every
Yes.
time we connect, there's like 40 other things we want to add context around to help other people. So I think it's a really beautiful conversation, never-ending conversation that we're having here
Yeah.
in the context of your podcast. So thank you again for having me.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And as you said it, you are a fellow happiness expert, a happiness coach. And as such, I think that's really one of the reasons why we find ourselves connecting so much because there's so much in common in how we approach our work. And, it's just so easy to think about what else to talk about because, it's like I'm thinking to myself, what would I love to talk about? And voila, there you are, Alex, and you love to talk about it too.
Yeah, I could talk about happiness, living a fulfilled, happy life all day long until I'm blue in the face. So I love being able to connect on that front.
Yes. So, for those of you who are listening, in case you have missed the earlier episodes we've done with Alex, please go back into our archives and check them out. We have talked about holistic habits of happiness. We have talked about how to not be a people pleaser anymore. We have talked about habits of happiness in the workplace. And actually, as we were wrapping up last time, one of the things that you brought up, Alex, that I thought would be really amazing to talk about today is the idea of the levels of happiness. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you understand that concept, first of all?
Yeah, of course. I think I can put it in the context actually of my personal story. So as you know, and maybe listeners, you don't know yet, but I used to work in a corporate marketing job and I was extremely, extremely burnt out. So before I became a life coach, before I became a happiness expert, and I kind of dove into my own pursuit of happiness because I was living this life that was not mine. I was just checking boxes, doing all of the things that I was meant to do. That really like I just said, set me off on like this pursuit of what is happiness? Like, what does happiness mean? Because I was taught that graduating from a really good university, going into the workforce, using that degree to get a job, staying on that career path, meeting somebody in your 20s that you're going to marry, like having all the money, all the things that's going to make you happy. And I look back at my life at that time and I technically achieved all of those things. I had all of those things, but I myself was so miserable. I was so sad. I was depressed. I was anxious. I was so burnt out from work. I was settling for somebody that didn't actually make me happy, but I thought I needed to be with somebody because of my age. And I was living in a city where if you, from the outside looking in, I had this dream life because I'm living in New York. I have access to the city. I can go do all these cool things in New York, right? I could get the external validation, right? But the internal validation for the life I wanted to be missing. like I was the most miserable version of myself, the worst, the saddest, lowest, most alone I've ever felt in my life. And I was like, what does it mean to be happy in my own life? Because like I said, I checked the boxes. I thought those things were going to bring me happiness. And in fact, they actually made me the worst version of myself. So I set off on this pursuit of happiness, if you will, and tried to really figure out, what does being happy mean? Like,
Yeah.
what does happiness truly mean in my life, in the context of my priorities, in the context of work, in the context of relationships? Like, what is happiness?
Mhm.
So that really got me on the path of exploring positive psychology and the science of well-being. And now what I very clearly understand was missing from my life was all three levels of happiness. So Dr. Martin Seligman, he's the leading psychologist in positive psychology. And he developed a theory around having three levels of happiness, right? And I like to think of it as a pyramid if you're looking at it, because every level adds to the one before it. So in order for you to start feeling happy, you have to focus on yourself. And that's like baseline level of happiness, which is just you're using your time in a way that makes you feel good. Like there's meaning behind how you're spending your days. You're taking care of yourself. You're nurturing your interests. You are doing things that excite you, and you're not just doing things to check a box, right? So that's level one. Level two is activating your strengths. I consider your strengths your superpowers in life. There are 24 total, I don't know, there's a couple theories about how many total strengths there are, but roughly 24, let's call it. And we all possess every one of those strengths to a certain extent, but we all have five that are our top five strengths. And so when we are activating our top five strengths, we are fulfilling level two of happiness. And what's really interesting is that your natural interests in things actually indicate where your strengths are. We're naturally attracted to things that we're good at, but our society tells us, focus on your weaknesses, make your weaknesses better. And so we get a little lost in the shuffle here, and it's hard for a lot of people to unlock level two of happiness because we're so focused on our weaknesses. And then finally, level three of happiness, this is like the pinnacle of happiness, right? You're taking care of yourself. You love who you are. You're feeding your interests. You're activating your strengths every day. And then the third level of happiness is finding meaning and purpose. And
Mhm.
so using your strengths to make an impact, to give back to other people, to make a positive change in the world, something that actually drives so much meaning for you and makes every action you're taking purposeful. Because again, I think we get stuck in just doing things because we have to, doing things because we're checking boxes, and the motivation behind a lot of our actions are meaningless. And
Yeah.
that's where a lot of conflict comes into play.
Mm.
So longest answer ever to your question. But that is how I look at the three levels of happiness and how they all build upon one another. And
Yeah.
when you reach that pinnacle, that top, that third level, that's where long-term enduring happiness comes from. And
Yeah.
that is what I strive to do for myself. That's what I strive to help my clients do.
Yes. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you actually so much for laying out that framework, as it were, of the different levels of happiness. Oh, there's just so much juicy stuff we can dig into just in the context of what you have been sharing right now. So I guess maybe we can take a little bit of time and dig a little bit deeper into each level at a time.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for tuning into this episode. Hope you're getting value out of it. For your information, this episode has been sponsored by the Happiness 101 program. Are you a change maker, coach, trainer, or healer? Are chains of fear holding you back from making the impact and income you desire? Using a unique combination of positive psychology and the spiritual wisdom of our most effective change makers, The Happiness 101 program helps you break through your limiting beliefs and manifest the abundance and success you desire with fun and ease. Interested? Book a free Happiness 101 exploration call with me, your happiness expert, Samia Bano. Just use my online calendar link in the show notes. Now, back to the show. So, I feel like the first level you talked about, where we take care of ourselves, we have covered that a little bit in our previous episodes, for example, talking about the habits of happiness and so forth. But one thing that I was thinking about in that context was, um, I follow also, a sort of similar structure as you do. And in the context of the self-care level of happiness, um, it's just amazing how there's so much that actually goes into it also. It's not like just one thing. For example, one of the sub levels, or I guess levels contained within this, or one of the things contained within this level, is the idea of developing um, positive mood skills, like how to be happy, right? In a way that is actually reflected in a positive mood. So when I think of a positive mood, I'm thinking about being in a mood where I'm smiling, I'm laughing, I'm actually feeling like joyful and wanting to sing and dance, because I'm feeling so joyful. I think that is what a lot of times people think about when they think about happiness, is that positive mood state. And that's not all there is to being happy, or taking care of yourself in the context of being happy, right? Like, for example, um, I think also about something like developing resiliency skills. So like when something bad happens, even if you have excellent positive mood skills, but something bad happens, it can take a different skill set to help yourself bounce back from that kind of a trauma. Like if you have experienced a trauma, or you've just had any significant something happen in your life that has brought you out of your positive mood state. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's like so much that goes into even just taking care of yourself. Is that like, what's your perspective on that? Um, how do you teach and talk about that?
Yeah. And so I think a positive mood state, obviously, very much so happiness. However, I think it's really important to differentiate between that and toxic positivity,
Mm,
and recognizing that life is going to throw you curveballs all the time. And it's not just sitting there being like, everything is great, and the whole room around you is burning down to the ground, right? Like
yeah,
that's not productive,
yeah.
because that wouldn't be honoring the fact that we're human beings and have a full range of emotions. But I think it's recognizing in the less desirable moments, having, and you mentioned stress resilience. I think that's really important. It's recognizing that you have gotten through 100% of the obstacles that you have been faced with in your life, and
Mm,
approaching those moments with a problem solver mindset. So you're not like, everything's fine, everything's great, we're gonna be okay. It's like, no, it's like, recognize, okay, this is a really shitty situation. How can we approach it in the way that is going to be most productive and most helpful for us right now? So it's recognizing that, and that's where stress resilience comes in, right? It's like, okay, this isn't great. However, I'm approaching it in the sense of like, what do I have control over right now?
Yeah.
Right. So when we focus our attention on things we have control over, like our attitude, like our reactions to things, how we show up for things, that's where we'll minimize stress and maximize happiness versus getting thrown these curveballs and focusing on things you can't control. And then all of a sudden you're spiraling and making the situation 1,000 times worse. And that's where your stress is going to spike like crazy and your happiness is going to decrease like crazy. So
Yeah.
it's really about, I think, from like that positive mood state, but also having a problem solver mindset. I think
Mhm.
the two go hand in hand because recognizing not every situation is going to be great. You're not going to be in la la land and have joy all the time, right?
Yes.
So that's my perspective on that.
I love it. Thank you for bringing out this idea of toxic positivity because I think that so many people struggle with how to be
Mm-hmm.
happy because they get stuck with positive positive toxic positivity.
Toxic positivity.
In terms of like it's such a I mean, I want to say myth, but maybe that's not the right word in this context, but maybe it is. But in terms of like misunderstanding about
Yeah.
how to be happy and what it takes to be happy, makes me think about when I used to be training with my happiness coach and mentor. She, taught us like different exercises for how to build resiliency, for those times when, life brings you down or you feel down for whatever reason. And she said the first step in bouncing back actually is acceptance of what is. Like if you don't accept
Mm-hmm.
what is, including the reality of I feel terrible right now,
Mm-hmm.
or I feel really sad, or, however it is that you're feeling, like acceptance of that and acceptance of whatever other facts you can figure out in that situation. Like you need to start with acceptance. And then you can build on that. And like you said, with a problem solving mindset, you can be like, okay, what can I do? And then you start to implement what you can do. And that actually helps to start move you toward the solution and into a state where you can build up your positive mood again.
Yeah. And I think one tool that I teach my clients, and one of my clients actually taught me this. So I like this. I really like this reframe. And now I use it to teach others. So we constantly are asking ourselves, okay, in bad, weird situations, it's like, okay, what can we be grateful for? Right. It's like, is something I can focus my attention on that is good. Right. But I think the reframe here, you can ask yourself, how can I be grateful for this situation? Right.
Mm,
Good, bad, ugly, in between all of that thing. And that is going to help you start to build more of that problem solver mindset. So if you don't feel like you have that skill set at this moment, instead of saying, what am I grateful for, to kind of redirect your attention, say, how can I be grateful for this? Because I think life is always either giving you what you want or
mm,
giving you the lesson you need. I
yeah.
think that is a way for you to take any situation you're in and really try to understand, what can I be grateful for in this moment? How is this something like what is this moment teaching me? How can I be grateful for something that's happening right now? And again, that's
Mhm.
going to start to shift the perspective away from the negative and into the positive and get you
Yes.
into more of that positive mindset and state.
Yes, yes. Oh my gosh, this is such a awesome example and lesson to learn because, I think that, wow, especially when we're talking about resiliency, that is so, so key because, you can be feeling grateful or be able to identify what you're grateful for, hopefully, in a general context, and still find yourself feeling miserable in the specific context of whatever has brought you down in the moment. And so to actually not only think about what you have to be grateful for generally, maybe that's a good starting point for
Mhm.
somebody who may be struggling with their feelings and struggling to figure out, well, what do I have to be grateful for? Well, yeah, I mean, just find anything. If you're struggling, just find anything you have to be grateful for and then sort of, work your way into then also thinking about what do I have to be grateful for, or how can I be grateful in this situation, about this situation,
Mhm.
because ultimately you will have to accept the situation and face the situation. So, I love that.
Yeah. And I think a really, really simple example of this. So say you're driving somewhere, you're on your way to work, wherever you're going, and you hit traffic, right? And you're like, I'm going to be late for my first meeting. You have no control over the traffic. You have no control over being late at this point. So in that moment, you can ask yourself, okay, how can I be grateful for this? And you could look at it and say, great, I get 20 extra minutes to listen to a podcast that I really like. I get 20 extra minutes this morning of alone time to like spend with myself. And that's a really positive thing, right? Instead of being like so frustrated by the fact that you can't drive and get there on time, right?
Yeah.
And then just like put it in the context of like, what is worst case scenario here? Like you miss 10 minutes of the meeting. You can email somebody. Is it mission critical to get so worked up over something you have no control over? And I think that's where little baby mindset shifts in moments like that, that'll help start to flex that muscle and build the resilience and build the positive mindset. So when larger, more, don't want to say catastrophic, but more unpleasant things happening, larger scale things that are more frustrating won't probably bother you as much. And that'll keep you
Right.
more in level one happiness of like, okay, I've got this. We're good. I can make this work, even in not such a favorable situation.
Yes. I mean, that's a great point that, we all have triggers. What frustrates me may not frustrate you, but there is something that frustrates you. And I'll have my own list, you will have your own list. And really, I love the idea of, building up our muscle, our happiness
Mm-hmm.
muscle, our resilience
Yeah.
muscle, whatever you want to call it. But that it is a practice and you get better and better at it the more you practice it. And so you get bothered by fewer things, you get stressed by fewer things. And when you do get stressed by something, you're able to recover from it faster and more effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I really enjoy that so much. Like, actually, that's one of the things that I think about. How can I be grateful in this situation is like, oh my gosh, this is another opportunity for me to build my muscles, my
Yeah.
happiness muscles and my resilience muscles. Because my gosh, the more you build it, it's like so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just like you have to go into the gym and pick up the dumbbells and do your presses and your curls and all of those things, the stress resilience is the same type of deal. The more you flex that muscle, the stronger it's going to get.
Yes, yes. I mean, some of my most amazing heroes, I think, what made them so heroic seeming in their um, actions and in their personality is that they have just actually built up to such a high level this kind of happiness and resilience muscle. So I'm thinking about, amazing models that we have, whether, like let's say my first thought oftentimes goes to the prophets, like Jesus, like Muhammad and etc. But even if you think about like um, in the context of real life people that we know, um, if you think about, oh my gosh, just yesterday I was watching an interview um, of Malala, and my gosh, she one of the things that I love about her so much is that she has so much positive energy and outlook, and she does so much amazing work after having been through so much tragedy and trauma in her life. And she's sort
Mm-hmm.
of like used all of that to become like a force of good, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, how does she do that? How does she keep doing that? And I think a lot of it has to do with she has developed a really strong resiliency muscle. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's just that, people like Malala have just built really strong resiliency muscles.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, okay. So is there anything more that you want to say about level one of happiness? Or should we now talk about level two of happiness?
Yeah, so I will say, so thinking about like level one, it's all about like gratification and using your time wisely.
Mm,
And so I think a big piece of that is getting into a state of flow where you
mm,
are activating things that you are truly passionate about. I think that really matters. And I think obviously when I was working in my corporate position, I spent 40 plus hours of my week, 5 out of 7 days of my life, every single week, doing something I did not care about.
mm,
And so I think that's where a lot of conflict and unhappiness came in my life because I was doing things I didn't care about. So
mm,
outside of holistic health, taking care of yourself physically, mentally, I also think it's activating um, an interest in things, like focusing on things, even if it's a hobby, even if it's like running, if it's art, if it's film, if it's tinkering with stuff, anything of that nature, putting yourself in positions where you can activate your flow state and actually just totally get lost in the passion of what you're doing.
mm.
That's where level one happiness is like really, really strongly activated.
Yeah.
So besides positive mindset, besides stress resilience, all that stuff is obviously very important, but it's another big piece of that is pursuing passions and things that you're interested in for fun.
Right, right. And that actually also, because all the levels of happiness, as you had said, they build upon each other. So of course are connected and they support each other. And I can totally start to see from what you're saying how level one is connected to level two. So tell me more
Yeah.
about level two.
Yeah, so level two is all about embodying your strengths. And like I mentioned, there are roughly 24 strengths that we all possess, and
Mm,
we all possess different amounts of those strengths. And so at the top, you will have your 5 strongest strengths. And when you are activating those, and like I said, you are naturally interested in things where your strengths are being activated. You just need to pay a little bit more attention to them because I think, like I mentioned, we all really are told to focus on your weaknesses, right? In interviews for jobs, people will ask, well, what are your weaknesses, right? And you have to like come up with this weird answer to make it sound positive that you've got weaknesses, right? But it's what we really should be focusing on is our strengths. And so I'll give you an example
mm,
because also we could have the exact same top 5 strengths, but we could activate them totally differently. So,
mhm,
for instance, my number one strength in life is communication. And it's very interesting because I worked in marketing, which is all about communication, right? But the way I was activating that strength was not in line with how I fully want to use that strength.
Mm,
So in my position, I did a lot of copywriting. And so that's like communicating the brand message, communicating to our customers via writing. But what I've learned is that I actually enjoy what my strength, what my superpower is my voice, my speaking communication, the way I present presentations, the way I connect with people through communication, right? And so I felt a lot of friction in that career because I wasn't activating that strength correctly. Um, I was like, right, I was like kind of on the right track
mm,
and I
mm,
kind
mm,
of was interested in that kind of stuff, but it was activated incorrectly. And so now as a coach, as somebody who actively communicates with people, who is actively sharing my story on podcasts, on Instagram reels and videos, right? It's like that is where my superpower shines. And I love it, right? I love doing it. I love being on podcasts. I love sharing my story. I love talking to people. And so that's the intersection of like what you love doing, what this strength is, and how that is best activated. And so I encourage everybody to take a strengths test and figure out, there's so many on the internet you can take. I really like the Gallup Strengths Finders test. It's what I use with my clients. And that'll tell you what your top 5 strengths are. And then it gives you a really long description of what the strength is. And then you just go through and highlight the pieces that resonate with you. And
mm.
that's most likely how that strength is activated for you. And so when you go out into the world and you're activating your strengths, whether it be in the workplace, whether it be like chatting with some like in a volunteer situation, whether that be in a hobby situation, if you're activating those strengths, you are 6 times more likely to say that you have found your calling and
Mm,
like you're pursuing your like life's purpose, which
yeah,
is wild to me. And I genuinely feel that way about being a coach.
yeah,
And additionally, like being a coach and an entrepreneur activates all 5 of my top strengths. So it's just like I'm getting so much gratification and satisfaction of because I'm using the skills and the tools that I naturally have inside of me,
yes,
right? And
yeah,
just like honing them and getting better at them. And then that's where excellence comes into play, right? So it's a really finding out what your strengths are and figuring out how to activate them to work best for you. That's where like you will find a lot of satisfaction in your life and a lot of happiness.
yes. And the 2 cents I'll throw in there just to build on what you've been talking about, Alex, is that in positive psychology, when we talk about strengths, by and large, a lot of the focus of the research has actually been on character strengths.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about aspects of your character. So for sure, everyone has character, and therefore you have character strengths. Because I remember in the days when I used to really struggle with my happiness, I was like, I'm not good at anything. And I would struggle to even think of something that I was good at. But this approach to thinking about strengths from a character perspective, I think
Mm-hmm.
really helped me because when we think about character strengths, you have things like kindness,
Yeah.
patience, courage, like all kinds of different character strengths. And actually, I think probably, now I can't remember all the different um, um, different strengths either, like off the top of my head. But in any case, the point is, if you're alive, you're living, you have a character and you have character strengths for sure. And I think that was like one of the really cool things about taking a character strengths test is that, it just, like you can't fail it. There's no way you're going to take a character strengths test and come out with you have no strengths.
No, it's impossible. And
Yeah.
I think what's interesting too is you can look back on your life and say, look at certain situations and say, what was I really good at in that situation?
Hmm.
Right? You can find context clues if you really dig for them,
Yeah.
right? Like when I was figuring out in the context of me figuring out my career, I looked at all of the past jobs that I had and I was like, what are the parts of those jobs that I really liked? What are the parts that I didn't like and why? And I think one of the first clues in helping me figure out I wanted to be a coach was when I was in college, I was a tour guide on campus and I
Mhm.
would give college tours to prospective students. And I loved that job. And I was like, why did I love that job? And then once I took my strengths test, I was like, it makes sense. I my top three strengths were activated within that job. So I'm communicating with new students. I'm connecting with them. My second top strength is it's called woo, which means winning others over. So relationship building. So I'm building relationships with these people. They're trusting me to take them around campus and show them everything. And then my third top strength, it's called maximizer, which basically means like I can look at a situation and a person and see the potential in them and help them figure out their potential and take steps, right? So I'm looking at these students and I'm like, tell me what you're interested in. And they tell me what they're interested in. And I'm like, great, I would recommend this club. I'd recommend that thing over here. You have to meet this professor, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like me putting pieces together for people. So it
Yeah.
was like all three of my top strengths were like ding, 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 like going crazy. And I'm like, no wonder why I loved that job. I
Yeah.
didn't know it at the time, right? I was just like, oh, being a tour guide seems fun,
Yeah.
right? And so there's that context clue. I was naturally drawn to that type of role. And then now looking back on it in hindsight, I was like, oh, it makes so much sense because my strengths were activated. So really get in touch with what you like. Get in touch with yourself. Get in touch with what you're drawn to naturally. Odds are it's a push from one of your strengths.
Yes. Yes. Oh, and talking about strengths, I think I have now come to sort of really, I mean, this idea of focusing on our strengths has just become such a natural thing for me, such a natural approach to life that I forget how enticing I found the idea of turning my weaknesses into strengths or the idea of focusing on my weaknesses. And it's not something y- like, okay, so for example, I one of the most life-changing classes that I took in college was actually a self-defense course. And it was really, really helpful in very many ways. And in the self-defense course, they kept talking about this idea of turn your weaknesses into your strengths. And so I really sort of, got on to that in my mind. And I was like, yeah, this is an amazing thing. You take your weakness and you turn it into your strength. And then you don't have a weakness anymore. And that, that gave me this idea that, oh, this is the path to gaining more control and um, achieving more power in my life, And so I actually took that idea very seriously. And I was like, okay, how can I begin to apply this in my life? And so I actually went on a quest to to identify weaknesses that I had and work to turn them into strengths. And it's just to a certain extent, I found success in that quest because, there's definitely like lots of things that I was able to improve on. For example, just in the context of even the self-defense class, like I had no idea. I'd never hit anyone at all, ever. I don't think, like, especially in a physical fighting kind of a context. And so certainly I learned all kinds of skills and I got better at things like punching and kicking and being able to defend myself against if someone was trying to punch or kick me, etc. Um, but um, the problem that I realized later with this approach is that it creates so much stress in our life. It's not fun and easy to
No.
to be on this quest to turn your weaknesses into strength. It's not fun and easy and creates a lot of stress. A lot of stress.
Yeah, because imagine all of the energy you're putting into getting better at something you're not good at could be spent getting really good at the
Mhm.
things you are really freaking good at. And then
Mhm.
that's when those become superpowers,
Yeah,
right? Instead of just being like mediocre at a bunch of different things, you can get to be the expert and really, really good at a few things and use that to influence every decision and interaction and experience that you have.
yes. Makes me actually think about super hero movies where there's multiple superheroes
Yeah.
because like you see, I think one of the things that I really appreciate about these movies is that you get to see like different approaches to solving a problem,
Yeah.
or you're like, oh. So it's like, and each hero, like when they're, being their most effective, is utilizing their unique superpowers. So it's like, um, uh, okay, right now I'm thinking about The Incredibles as a specific example of a superheroes movie. And so, like, for example, and now I'm blanking on the names of the superheroes. But like the dad, who had super
Yeah.
strength, right? Versus the
Yeah.
mom who could stretch and who had that plasticity.
Elastigirl.
Elastigirl, yes. There we go. Versus, the daughter who could go invisible and build up shields versus the son who had super speed. And so like even in the one situation that they were all facing, they each used their strengths to deal with that situation. Like
Yeah.
Elastigirl didn't try to do super strength stuff or didn't try to become invisible as her
Right.
way of dealing with whatever the situation was. She was like, I'm Elastigirl. I use my power to be elastic to deal with the situation. And there's like this whole scene, if you remember, in the first movie where there's a secret headquarters of the villain, and in the first of all, the dad, who's a super strength superhero, he infiltrates into the headquarters and he does it in a certain way. And then Elastigirl, the mom, um, has to infiltrate, like later on in the movie, like actually because the dad is stuck and he's in trouble. And so she's going to rescue him. And so now Elastigirl has to infiltrate the same place, but she does it in a completely different way than how the dad did it, and she used her elastic strength. So, I mean, that was just like so cool, to see like how in one situation you can have different ways of dealing with it. And the best way to deal with it for you is to be like, okay, what are my strengths? And how can I use my strengths to deal with this?
Yeah, exactly. And it just brings so much, so many different perspectives to the table, right? And it proves that there isn't one correct way to solve a problem,
Mhm.
right? But if you lean into your strengths and what you're naturally good at and use those talents to help you, you're going to be much better off and you're going to feel much more fulfilled and happy than if you try to be good at a bunch of weaknesses
Mhm.
versus just being really freaking great at your five strengths.
Yes, because we have like so many weaknesses too. I mean, that's the other thing with focusing on weaknesses is that if you start to focus on your weaknesses, my God, you just keep coming up with more and more and more and more
Yeah.
things that you are bad at.
Yeah. And I think focusing on your strengths, right? That's level two of happiness. That is what's actually going to unlock level three is when you use your strengths to find some level of meaning or purpose, right?
Yeah.
I think levels two and three really go hand in hand because one question I ask my clients when we start working together always, I have them define, like they're on their deathbed. It's 50 years from now. They're looking back on their life with no regrets. I'm like, what does a successful life look like to you? Every single one of them says something with I want to make an impact. I want to have a positive effect on the people around me. I want there to be meaning in my life. So we are all naturally drawn to wanting to help others and have meaning in our lives. So for you to activate the third level of happiness and really break into that zone, use your strengths to positively impact others. That is going to give you the strongest meaning and purpose in life. And that's where long-term enduring happiness is going to be activated. And again, I
Yeah.
can give you that in the context of my own personal experience of now I'm literally using all five of my top strengths as an entrepreneur, as a coach, and I am now using my skills and my strengths to positively impact the lives of others, right? So I'm using my strengths to find that meaning and purpose in my own life and make a positive effect, have a positive effect, make a positive impact on other people. And
Yeah.
so because of that, again, happiness is a work in progress every day, but I feel like I've unlocked that third level of happiness because the work that I'm doing matters. There's meaning behind every single action I'm taking every day. I'm using what I'm good at to give back to others. And
Yeah.
that meaning is absolutely priceless. And that's what's going to make you feel really happy and really fulfilled and get to the end of your life and say, wow, I lived a really good life.
Yeah.
Right. And there's this beautiful quote of like, people aren't going to remember what you did for them. They're going to remember how you made them feel. And so my goal in life, how I define success is how many people am I positively impacting every single day with my strengths?
Yes. Ooh,
And that's what I work towards.
I love that. Yeah, and I think this is like touching upon again one of those other big myths out there that I think really trip people up. That there's this, I think it may be partly also a cultural thing, um, like here in America and in other cultures that are more individualistic and industrial, or like caught up in this modern industrial sort of setup of things, um, because like in a lot of the for example Asian cultures, where I'm like me and my family originally, we are from India and Pakistan, the Indian subcontinent. And our cultures, at least traditionally, um, have a more collectivistic mindset as opposed to an individualistic mindset. And one of the things about like that distinguishes individualistic versus collectivistic cultures is, like like here, for example, in America, we are taught to think about ourselves. Like, what do I like? What's
Yeah.
my identity? What are my preferences? What will make me individually, personally happy? And to do those things. So whether it's in the context of what I'm going to study or what job am I going to take or, pretty much any decision in my life. And versus in collectivistic cultures, it's all about the group. Usually it's about the family, but you can also have like other groups in terms of your community or your nation. Um, and it's all about, well, what does my family need and want, and what will create more harmony and happiness and peace for my family. And this is reflected in even things like, for example, after we came to America and we, started mixing more with Americans in America and having conversations. So like, this is a dynamic I was really um, tickled to see in my family, where my mom is actually probably my mom and my sister are the two people in my family who are the most social. Myself, my brother, and my dad, I mean, especially like when we first came to America, this was like 22, 23 years ago, we were all socially challenged people. Like certainly me, I was pretty socially challenged. And so anyway, it's like my mom loves to talk. She'll be sitting like on a plane and be like one of those people who will like make best friends by the time she's off the plane with the person that she was sitting next to. Um, and it was really interesting to see that, like in America, people ask you, so tell me more about you. What do you do? What do you like? And my mom always answers in the context of, well, I'm a mom and I'm a daughter and I do this for my family and I do that for my family. And she hardly ever has anything to say about herself as an individual. And I didn't think this was anything strange at all until after I started going to college and started to learn this, like where I was constantly being told, no, think about you, Samia. What do you like? What do you want? What classes do you want to take? And so I learned this new mindset. And then when I came back home and I saw my mom acting the way that we always acted, then that contrast really hit me.
Mm.
Uh, you know, but what's the point? Why am I telling this story? Um, wait a minute, give me a moment. I lost the point I wanted to make initially. There's a cultural difference, but we're
We were
talking
talking
about
about like the collective
yes,
versus more of individualistic.
yes, but there's a reason I brought. Oh my gosh, we're talking about sustainable happiness. Doing something meaningful, helping other people. By helping other people. Yeah, so this is what I was talking about. So it's like in American culture, I noticed that there's so much emphasis And I'm not, by the way, saying everything's perfect in our Indian Pakistani culture. We have our own problems, but I think one thing that happens in America is that because there's this sort of individualistic orientation, uh, and we go too far with it, I think sometimes, like for example, when we're thinking about, well, what work am I going to do? You are trained and you're taught to think only from the perspective of how you can best serve yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like you were sharing, Alex, one of the core aspects of how we get to build this third level of happiness in our life is actually to be doing something that helps us to help other people. And we
Yeah.
don't realize how much of a core human need that is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're so right. Being an American is extremely individualistic, and we only care about ourselves. We only care about what we need for to be, I think very less given the opportunity to think about how you can help other people. And I know I talk a lot about this in the context of work, but you can also find meaning through motherhood, right? Like that gives you purpose, right? You are in service of other people, right? Volunteering in your free time, you are in service of whatever organization you're helping, just using your time well spent, activating your strengths, giving back to others.
Yeah,
It's really that simple.
yeah, yeah.
Is it
Oh,
easy to do all the time? No. However, all three levels of happiness are quite simple.
yes. Yes, they are simple. They are simple. They don't always feel easy because oftentimes they're going contrary to, the dominant cultural teachings and dominant cultural frames. And they're going against the myths that are so, so much, wow. They're so like the myths, like people really believe in these happiness myths, and so they're like working so hard to try and be happy following these mythical ways. But really, that's really so to create a shift and do something different from what society is teaching you and so forth. That can feel hard because it can feel like you're going against the current in some ways. You can hit the challenge of uh, people thinking you're doing something crazy, um, and things like that. And so it's like until you learn how to sort of take control of your own happiness and, by activating all these levels of happiness in your own life and so forth, it can feel hard. Um, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. If you connect with Alex, if you connect with me, we can help ease the way. And so it will not only be
Yeah.
simple, it'll also become more easy and fun to do.
Yes. 100%.
Oh man, Alex, oh, you just made me think about so many more things we still need to talk about. And of course, we are out of time again.
Always.
Uh, do you have any last thoughts or words you'd like to share for right now?
Yeah. I think when it comes to happiness, if you're feeling unhappy in your current situation right now, it just takes one decision, one choice, one one moment of saying, I don't want to feel like this anymore. And you can absolutely make a change. And if activating all three levels of happiness feels like a lot, start with the baseline, start with 5 minutes of gratitude, right? That's where we started this conversation. That little bit of time for yourself will add up eventually. So one step at a time, and all it takes is one choice. I believe happiness is a choice, and it just takes one choice, one decision to change what you don't like. and take a step towards something that you do and is going to make you happy.
I love that. I love that. And I won't add anything to that because we have to wrap up. Except I will just remind all of you who are listening, please check the show notes because we will be dropping Alex's links in there so you can connect with her and reach out to her for help and support. And me too, if and whenever you feel that you want to create more fun and ease in your process of becoming more happy, living more happy. So until we connect next time, I just wish you lots and lots of peace and joy.